大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。 今天我们要说的这个人，用他自己的话来形容，他是有史以来最伟大的。这句话不是吹牛，是事实。他叫穆罕默德阿里，一个从肯塔基州路易维尔走出来的黑人孩子，靠着2只拳头改变了整个世界。1942年1月17日，美国南方的路易维尔城，卡修斯马瑟勒斯克莱2世出生了。父亲是个招牌画家，母亲在别人家里做清洁工，家里不富裕但温暖。父亲卡修斯克莱一世是个充满艺术气质的人，他喜欢画画，喜欢说话，喜欢唱歌，这些性格都传给了儿子。但父亲也有另一面，他是个愤怒的人，对黑人在美国社会的处境充满愤怒，这种愤怒也传给了儿子，只是儿子找到了更好的出口。小卡修斯从小就是个话多的孩子，嘴巴从来不停，邻居说这孩子长大一定是个大人物，因为谁也说不过他。12岁那年，发生了一件改变他命运的小事，他心爱的红色自行车被偷了。那辆脚踏车是他最珍贵的财产，他气得跑去找在附近巡逻的警察。那个警察名叫乔马丁，卡修斯气冲冲地说要找到小偷揍他一顿。马丁警官是个业余拳击教练，他看着这个愤怒的小鬼头，笑着说，你要揍人之前，得先学会怎么打拳才行。就这样，因为一辆丢失的脚踏车，世界上最伟大的拳击手诞生了。马丁警官带着卡修斯进入了哥伦比亚健身房，那是他人生第一次戴上拳击手套，第一次闻到那种混合着汗水和皮革的味道，第一次感受到打出一拳的冲击感。教练说他从来没见过一个孩子学得这么快。卡修斯的脚步像猫一样轻盈，出拳速度让人眼花缭乱，而且他从来不害怕。这种不害怕不是冲动，是一种深层的自信。那个年纪的孩子很少有这种东西。训练的第一天晚上，卡修斯回到家，告诉父亲说他以后要成为世界冠军。父亲笑了，说你最好先练完这个星期再说。但6年之后，卡修斯做到了他说的事。1960年，罗马奥运，18岁的卡修斯克来代表美国出赛轻重量级拳击。在罗马的那几个星期，他让整个奥运村都认识了他。他走到哪里就说到哪里，告诉每个遇到的选手和记者，他是这里最伟大的人，他一定会赢得金牌。大家笑他不知天高地厚，但比赛开始后，没有人笑了。他的打法让所有人都傻眼。轻重量级通常打的是力量对力量，但卡修斯根本不跟你拼力量，他动，永远在动，脚步不停地移动，让对手的拳头找不到目标，然后在对方疲惫的瞬间，送出精准的刺拳组合。决赛他对上波兰选手兹比格涅夫·皮特欧斯基，那场比赛被形容为艺术，裁判全体一致判定卡修斯克莱获胜。18岁的年轻人，奥运金牌戴在脖子上，人生的顶点。他以为从此一切都不同了。回到路易维尔的时候，他带着金牌走在街上，市长接见了他，报纸报道了他，他是英雄。但那个年代的美国南方是个奇特的地方，你可以是英雄，但你必须记住自己的位置。传说中最广为人知的版本是他带着金牌走进一家餐厅想吃饭，老板说对不起，我们这里不接待黑人，奥运金牌换不来一顿饭。这个故事的细节有争议，阿里自己的自传里说到过这段，但那个年代那种现实是确实是存在的。种族隔离法律在美国南方各州依然有效，黑人不能和白人使用同一个厕所，不能坐公车前排，不能进某些学校。奥运金牌改变不了这些。有说法说卡修斯盛怒之下把金牌扔进了俄亥俄河。不管这件事是否真的发生，那种愤怒是真实的，这种愤怒成了他日后最强大的驱动力量。1960年代初期，卡修斯正式进入职业拳坛。他的训练师安杰洛·邓迪第一次看到他的时候， 就知道这个年轻人不一样。邓迪后来说，他有一种我从没见过的组合，速度、力量、协调性和一种让人无法忽视的表演欲。所谓的表演欲是阿里的标志。他在比赛之前写诗，预测自己几回合击倒对手，有时候说了就真的做到了。他创造了那句永远的名言，蝴蝶般飞舞，蜜蜂般刺激。这句话完美描述了他的打法，也完美描述了他这个人，轻盈、优雅，让人以为他只是在漂浮，然后在你没防备的时候，刺穿你的防线。1964年，这是改变一切的一年。1月份，卡修斯向当时的世界重量级拳击冠军桑尼·利斯顿发出挑战。利斯顿是什么人？利斯顿是个让整个拳击界都不敢正眼看他的人。他的过去充满暴力和街头斗争，眼神像一把刀。他2次击倒了前世界冠军弗洛伊德·帕特森，每一场比赛都让对手像是在挨揍。几乎所有的赔率都看好利斯顿，有些记者甚至写文章说担心卡修斯的人身安全，说这个22岁的年轻人根本不知道自己在干什么。卡修斯怎么回应？他说利斯顿太丑了，丑到不配站在同一个拳台上。他说利斯顿是个假熊，是个纸老虎，我要在第8回合把他打趴。赛前的记者会上，卡修斯冲进去大喊大叫，整个现场闹翻天。比赛在迈阿密海滩举行。1964年2月25日，比赛开始，所有预期利斯顿轻松获胜的人都错了。卡修斯根本不让利斯顿碰到他，他在移动，一直在移动。利斯顿的拳头一次次落空，那双被称为世界上最危险的拳头，打到的只是空气。第3回合发生了一个小插曲，卡修斯的眼睛进了什么东西，视线模糊。他跑去告诉角落的邓迪说看不清楚了。邓迪把水洒在他脸上，告诉他继续移动，继续让对手追不上你。那一回合卡修斯靠着脚步存活了下来，眼睛的问题慢慢消退。第5回合之后，利斯顿开始显出疲态，他追了这么久，一直追不上，体力开始消耗。第6回合结束的时候，利斯顿坐在角落，说他的肩膀受伤了，他不出赛了。裁判宣布卡修斯克莱获胜，现场一片混乱，没有人预料到这个结果。卡修斯站在拳台中央，对驻媒体席大喊，我是最伟大的，我把他打败了。但接下来的24小时发生的事情比拳击赛本身更震撼。比赛后的隔天早上，卡修斯克莱召开记者会，他宣布他是穆斯林，他加入了伊斯兰民族组织，他的名字不再是卡修斯克莱了，他的名字是穆罕默德阿里。这个宣告在1964年的美国，就像往平静的水面扔了一颗炸弹。那个年代的美国社会对伊斯兰民族组织有强烈的偏见，这个组织主张黑人应该建立自己的独立社群。他们的精神人物迈尔凯勒斯用激烈的言辞批判美国的种族主义，很多白人美国人感到恐惧，但阿里说，这是我的选择，这是我的信仰，这是我的权利。他说卡修斯克莱是一个奴隶的名字，那个名字是他的祖先被强加的，穆罕默德阿里才是他自己选择的名字，那才是属于他的名字。美国的大多数媒体拒绝使用新名字，继续称他为卡修斯克莱。阿里每次面对记者的时候，都会说你叫错名字了，我的名字是穆罕默德阿里。这场关于名字的战争持续了很多年，但时间站在他那边。接下来的几年，阿里继续称霸拳坛，一次次卫冕，一次次让对手在拳台上见识什么叫做真正的伟大。他打倒了弗洛伊德·帕特森，打倒了厄尼斯特·特雷尔。特雷尔比赛前坚持叫他卡修斯克莱，阿里在比赛过程中一边打他，一边大喊你叫我什么名字。那场比赛成了阿里用拳头说话最有力的一次。1967年，越战进入最激烈的阶段，美国每个月征召大量士兵送往越南丛林。那一年的4月28日，阿里在休士顿的兵役局 被要求向前一步表示接受征召入伍，他没有动。在场的人再次呼叫他的名字，他依然没有动。他以宗教信仰为由申请拒服兵役，遭到拒绝，他就这样拒绝了入伍。几个小时后，他发表声明，说出了那句震撼整个时代的话：我和越南人没有仇恨，没有越共叫我黑鬼，从来没有。这句话说出了多少人心里藏着的话。那些被征召的黑人士兵，那些在自己的国家依然被当成二等公民的人，那些每天面对种族歧视却不得不沉默的人。阿里把这些沉默的愤怒说出来了。美国政府的回应是迅速而严厉的，他被判定犯有违反兵役法罪，判处5年有期徒刑。虽然因为上诉而没有入狱，但他的拳击执照被所有州立拳击委员会吊销，世界重量级拳击冠军的头衔被剥夺，护照被没收，他不能在美国比赛，他不能出国比赛，他的收入几乎归零。更重要的是，他的名声在很大一部分美国人眼中变成了反面的，从英雄到逃兵，从冠军到罪犯。很多媒体把他描绘成不爱国的懦夫。那3年半是阿里人生中最艰难的日子，他失去了他最爱的东西，拳台，那个他可以用身体说话的地方。但他没有崩溃，他选择用另一种方式继续说话。他去大学校园演讲，他接受媒体采访，他站在反越战的示威人群里。年轻一代把他的勇气当成一种指引，他成了那个时代的道德象征。他说打赢一个拳击比赛很难，但如果为了赢得比赛就要出卖良心，那个代价太高了，我付不起。1970年，政治风向开始转变，阿里的拳击执照终于被归还，他可以重新站上拳台了。他带着3年半的积累回来了，更成熟，更深刻，但也更老了。他在重新开始比赛的同时，继续上诉兵役的判决。1971年，美国最高法院以8-0的裁决，推翻了对他的定罪。那一天是他最终得到清白的一天，但拳坛已经起了变化。在阿里缺席的3年半里，乔佛雷则拿到了世界重量级冠军。他是个打法完全不同于阿里的选手。强大的左勾拳，闷打型的战术。1971年3月8日，被称为世纪之战的比赛在麦迪逊广场花园举行，两个人都没有输过。全世界超过3亿人通过电视观看这场比赛。到了第15回合，佛雷则抓住机会，一记左勾拳把阿里打倒在地。阿里站起来了，但最终裁判判定佛雷则获胜。这是阿里职业生涯第一次失败。他没有消沉，他继续打，一场接一场。1974年，他和佛雷则进行了第2次对决，这次阿里赢了。现在他面对的是更大的挑战者，乔治·福尔曼。福尔曼在1973年的比赛里，把佛雷则打倒了6次。那个让阿里倒地的佛雷则，被福尔曼打倒了6次。那场被称为丛林之战的比赛，1974年10月30日，在非洲萨伊的金夏沙举行。阿里提前几个星期到达萨伊，他跑步，他训练，他和当地人交谈，整个萨伊的人都在为他呼喊，那种力量让他热血沸腾。比赛开始的时候情况不妙，福尔曼的力量是真实的，他的拳头打到阿里身上，沉重的像一把铁锤，但阿里执行了他的计划，靠绳战术，他靠在拳台的绳子上，让绳子吸收部分冲击力，同时用双臂保护头部和身体。福尔曼一拳一拳打过来，观众以为阿里在挨打，以为他已经没有办法了，但阿里在等。他在比赛过程中不停说话，告诉福尔曼，这就是你最强的力道吗？你打不了我的。这让福尔曼越打越躁，越打越用力，越用力越快速消耗体力。第7回合结束，福尔曼的出拳明显慢了。第8回合，阿里动了，一阵组合拳打出去，重重打中福尔曼的头部，福尔曼倒下了。裁判数到10，福尔曼无法站起来， 32岁的穆罕默德阿里重新成为世界重量级拳击冠军，整个金夏沙沸腾了。丛林之战成了拳击史上最著名的比赛之一。后来有一部纪录片叫做《当我们是国王》，记录了这整件事情。1975年，第3次阿里佛雷泽之战在菲律宾马尼拉举行。马尼拉之战那一场比赛被很多拳击专家认为是史上最伟大的拳击赛，两个人都几乎达到了人体的极限。马尼拉的天气酷热无比，拳台上的温度据说接近摄氏50度，双方都承受了难以想象的打击。阿里的脸肿了，佛雷泽的眼睛几乎打到睁不开。到了第14回合结束后，佛雷泽的教练做了一个艰难的决定，不让佛雷泽出赛第15回合，阿里获胜。但阿里赛后说，那是他这辈子最接近死亡的感觉。他说他以为自己会死在那个拳台上。那场比赛之后，阿里继续打了几年，但他的身体开始承受几十年拳击生涯的累积代价，速度慢了，反应慢了。1978年他输给了里昂斯平克斯，但7个月后又重新赢回了冠军头衔，这是拳击史上罕见的3度登顶。1981年最后一场比赛输给了特雷弗伯比克，那一天传奇的拳击生涯结束了，但接下来的考验是更深的。1984年阿里被确诊为帕金森氏症。帕金森氏症是一种影响神经系统的进行性疾病，主要症状是肌肉颤抖、动作迟缓、说话困难。很多医学研究认为，长期拳击运动造成的脑部撞击伤害加速了他的病情发展。那个曾经用嘴巴说服整个世界的人开始失去流畅说话的能力，那个曾经像蝴蝶一样在拳台上漂移的人开始颤抖着走路。但阿里没有躲起来，他继续出现在公众面前，以他能够出现的方式出现。1990年萨达姆海珊扣押了几百名外国人作为人质，阿里飞往巴格达和萨达姆谈判。他带着一批被扣押的美国人质回家，没有政府委托，就是自己去了。他走遍非洲为饥饿的孩子筹款，他去古巴和卡斯楚见面，他去巴勒斯坦探访难民，联合国任命他为和平信使。他说服务他人是你为住在这个地球上付的租金。2001年911事件发生后不久，阿里接受了采访，他说伊斯兰是爱的宗教，恐怖主义者不代表伊斯兰。他在最需要有人说这句话的时候说了这句话。1996年亚特兰大奥运开幕式，全世界几十亿人透过电视观看，奥运圣火传递到了最后一棒，那个最后点燃圣火的人没有人事先知道是谁。当那个颤抖着双手的身影出现在台阶上，全场静默。是阿里，他双手微微颤抖，缓缓地把手中的火炬靠近圣火盆，点燃了。全场的静默在一瞬间变成了山崩般的掌声，很多人哭了。那个带着帕金森氏症的颤抖，带住70年代反战精神，带着丛林之战的传奇，缓缓点燃奥运圣火的人，成为了奥运史上最动人的瞬间之一。阿里一生结了4次婚，有9个孩子，女儿拉伊拉·阿里也成为了职业拳击手，继承了父亲的衣钵。那些在私底下认识他的人说，他是个非常温柔的人，非常喜欢孩子，会变魔术，国手啊，让每个人都觉得他有用不完的时间陪你。2016年6月3日，穆罕默德·阿里在亚利桑那州的一家医院离开了这个世界，享年74岁，全世界为他哀悼。美国总统奥巴马说，穆罕默德·阿里震撼了世界，而他至今仍在震撼我们。前总统克林顿在告别式上说，他是一个真正的美国人，美国最好的那部分。回头看阿里的一生，有人说他的伟大在于速度，有人说在于技术，有人说在于那些比赛，但我觉得真正让他成为传奇的，是他那种从不妥协的身份认同。他在一个叫他卡修斯克莱的世界里，坚持要别人叫他穆罕默德阿里。他在一个告诉他应该去打仗的世界里，说我不去。 他在一个因为帕金森氏症而让他颤抖的身体里，依然出现在全世界面前，依然点燃那把圣火。他知道自己是谁，任何人任何力量都无法改变这一点。我们每个人都生活在各种压力之下，家庭的、社会的、职场的、时代的。我们很多时候不敢说出自己真正的想法，不敢选择真正想要的人生，不敢当那个站出来说不的人。阿里的故事告诉我们，忠于自己是有代价的，但那个代价值得。穆罕默德阿里，蝴蝶般飞舞，蜜蜂般刺激，他用整个生命告诉我们一个人可以走多远。谢谢你今天和 Jenny 一起认识这位了不起的灵魂。如果你也被阿里的故事感动了，记得分享给你身边的朋友，让更多人认识这位真正的大师。我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I am Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. Today we are talking about a man who once looked into the eyes of the entire world and declared himself the greatest of all time. Not the greatest of his era. Not one of the greatest. The greatest. Full stop. At the time, many people laughed. By the end of his life, nobody was laughing anymore. His name was Muhammad Ali. And he was right. Let us go back to January 17, 1942. Louisville, Kentucky. A city in the American South. A city where the color of your skin determined which schools you could attend, which restaurants would serve you, and which seats on the bus were considered yours. On that January morning, a boy named Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. was born. His father, Cassius Clay Sr., painted signs for a living. He was an artistic man who loved to draw, to sing, and to talk. His mother Odessa worked as a domestic cleaner in the homes of white families. The family did not have much money, but the house was full of warmth and voices. Cassius Sr. was also an angry man. He was furious at the conditions Black Americans faced every single day. He talked about it constantly at home. This anger passed to his son. But his son would find a far more powerful way to express it. Little Cassius was a talker from the very beginning. His mouth never stopped. The neighbors all agreed on one thing. This child was destined for something. Because nobody could out-argue him. Not the adults. Not the teachers. Not anyone. When Cassius was 12 years old, a small incident changed the entire direction of his life. His beloved red bicycle was stolen. That bicycle was his most prized possession. He was incandescent with rage. He ran to report the theft to a police officer who happened to be patrolling nearby. That officer was named Joe Martin. Cassius announced loudly that he planned to find the thief and deal with him personally. Officer Martin happened to run an amateur boxing program at a local gymnasium. He looked at this furious 12-year-old boy and smiled. He told Cassius that if he wanted to fight someone, he had better first learn how to throw a proper punch. And that was all it took. Because of a stolen bicycle, the greatest boxer in the history of the sport began his journey. Martin took Cassius to the Columbia gym. That was the first time he put on boxing gloves. The first time he breathed in that particular combination of sweat and leather that fills every boxing gym in the world. The first time he felt what it was like to hit something with real force and real intent. His coach said later that he had never seen a child learn so quickly. Cassius moved like a cat. His punch speed left experienced trainers shaking their heads. And he was never afraid. That absence of fear was not recklessness. It was something deeper. A bone-deep confidence in himself that most people spend a lifetime trying to find. On the very first night of training, Cassius went home and told his father he was going to become world heavyweight champion. His father laughed and suggested he perhaps make it through his first week of training before making such announcements. 6 years later, Cassius did exactly what he had said. In 1960, the Rome Olympics opened to the world. 18-year-old Cassius Clay had been selected to represent the United States in the light heavyweight division. During the weeks before his competition, he made himself impossible to ignore throughout the Olympic Village. He walked from group to group, from athlete to athlete, from journalist to journalist. He introduced himself as the greatest fighter in the world. He told anyone who would stop to listen that he was going home with a gold medal. People smiled and rolled their eyes. This loud, confident young American. What did he know? Then the competition began. And nobody rolled their eyes anymore. His style was completely unlike anything the crowd expected to see. Light heavyweight fighters typically traded power for power, standing their ground and exchanging heavy blows. Cassius refused to engage on those terms. He moved. He was always in motion. His feet never stopped shifting, stepping, and circling. His opponents swung at empty air again and again. And when they were frustrated and beginning to tire, he fired off sequences of precise punches that arrived before his opponent could possibly react. In the gold medal match, he faced Polish boxer Zbigniew Peter Zakowski. The fight was described by commentators watching ringside as something closer to art than athletics. All three judges scored it unanimously in favor of Cassius Clay, 18 years old. Olympic gold medal around his neck. He believed everything would be different now. When he returned to Louisville, the city celebrated him. The mayor received him with great ceremony. The newspapers ran long stories about him. He walked through the streets as a hero. But the American South of 1960 was a particular kind of place. You could be a hero. But there were still rules about where heroes of a certain skin color could eat, sleep, or sit. The most famous version of the story says he walked into a restaurant wearing his gold medal, hoping for a meal. The owner told him they did not serve black people. An Olympic gold medal could not purchase him a plate of food. The precise details of this particular incident have been examined by historians and debated at length. But what is not in dispute is the reality that the story captures. Racial segregation laws were still enforced across much of the American South. Black Americans and white Americans could not use the same bathrooms, the same water fountains, or attend the same schools. No medal, regardless of its value, could override that system. Some accounts say that in his fury, Cassius threw his gold medal into the Ohio River. Whether this specific act occurred or not, the emotion it represents was entirely real. The anger was real. The sense of being betrayed by the country whose flag he had worn while winning that medal was real. And that anger became the engine that powered everything that would follow. In the early 1960s, Cassius Clay entered professional boxing. His trainer Angelo Dundee, one of the most respected coaches in the sport, recalled the first time he watched his new fighter work in the gymnasium. Dundee described seeing a combination he had simply never encountered in any other fighter. Raw speed that was almost disturbing to witness. Natural coordination that no amount of training could fully produce. An instinctive sense of distance and timing that usually took fighters a decade to develop. And something harder to name. A quality of performance and showmanship. A need to have the crowd completely in the palm of his hand. That last quality was his signature. He wrote poetry before fights. He told journalists in rhyming verse which round he would use to knock out his opponent. Sometimes he was off by a round or two. Often he was exactly right. And he gave us the phrase that has echoed through more than 60 years of sporting culture. Float like a butterfly. Sting like a bee. The precise origin of that phrase is debated by boxing historians and researchers. But it captured something absolutely essential about both the fighter and the man. Lightness that concealed danger. Grace that was itself a strategy. Beauty that was also a weapon. In 1964, everything changed. In January of that year, Cassius Clay issued his challenge to the reigning world heavyweight champion, Sonny Liston. Liston was not merely a champion. He was a force of nature that most people in boxing were simply afraid to stand near. His past included time in prison. His connections to organized crime were well documented and widely known. His eyes in the ring had the flat, cold quality of a man who has seen things that most people could not imagine. He had demolished Floyd Patterson twice, both fights ending in the first round. Patterson was the former champion, a skilled and experienced professional. Liston treated him like a minor inconvenience. Before the scheduled fight, almost every boxing journalist predicted a disaster for Cassius. Some genuinely feared for the young fighter's physical safety. Cassius responded in his absolute trademark fashion. He told reporters that Liston was so ugly he should not be permitted in the same arena. He called him a big ugly bear. He declared he would put Liston on the canvas in the 8th round. He arrived outside Liston Training Hotel in the early hours of the morning and shouted up at the windows. At the pre-fight press conference, he rushed into the room generating enough noise for 10 people. A doctor who measured his blood pressure found it elevated simply from excitement. Some observers thought he was performing an act. Some genuinely believed he was unstable. He was neither. He was executing a deliberate strategy. Get inside your opponent's head before the first bell ever rings. Make him angry. Make him underestimate you. Make him come out too hard, too fast, and far too reckless. The fight took place at Miami Beach on February 25, 1964. What happened that night contradicted every single prediction. Cassius would not allow Liston to touch him. He moved constantly. He circled. He drifted away from punches before they fully arrived. Those famous Liston hands, which had destroyed every previous opponent who faced them, could not locate their target. In the third round, something entered Cassius' eyes. His vision blurred suddenly and badly. He went to his corner and reported that he could barely see. Dundee poured water on his face and gave him a straightforward instruction. Keep moving. Stay away from him. Do not let him land cleanly. Cassius survived that entire round on footwork alone. His vision gradually cleared. By the end of the sixth round, Liston was visibly exhausted. He had been chasing an impossible target for 15 full minutes. His power had been going into empty air again and again. His arms were heavy and his legs were slowing. When the bell rang for the seventh round, Liston did not rise from his corner stool. He said his shoulder was injured. He was finished. The referee raised Cassius Clay hand. New heavyweight champion of the world. The arena erupted in complete confusion. Nobody had prepared for this result. The new champion stood in the center of the ring and screamed toward the press section. He told them he was the greatest. He told them he had warned them and now they knew. But the truly seismic moment came the following morning. Cassius Clay called a press conference. He made an announcement that sent shockwaves across the entire country. He said he was a Muslim. He was a member of the Nation of Islam. He was no longer Cassius Clay. His name was Muhammad Ali. In 1964 America, this landed with the force of a detonation. The Nation of Islam was viewed by much of white America with deep suspicion and genuine fear. The organization taught that black Americans should build their own separate institutions rather than seeking integration with white society. Its most prominent spokesman Malcolm X used rhetoric that made enormous numbers of Americans profoundly uncomfortable. Ali was entirely unmoved by the reaction. He said this was his faith. This was his choice. This was his right. He said Cassius Clay was a slave name. His ancestors had been given that name by the white family that once owned them. He had not chosen it. It did not belong to him. Muhammad Ali was the name he had chosen for himself. That was the name that was truly his. The American media, almost without a single exception, refused to use his chosen name. They continued referring to him as Cassius Clay. Every single time a journalist used the old name, Ali corrected them. Patiently at first. Then with increasing directness. He made the correction again and again in interview after interview, year after year. Years later, the same media that had resisted so forcefully would use his chosen name without a second thought. Time had done its work. Over the following years, Ali continued to demonstrate beyond any doubt why the world was right to take him seriously as a fighter. He defended his title repeatedly. Each defense came with the familiar theater of predictions and insults and declared round numbers. And each defense concluded with the prediction proven accurate. His fight with Ernie Terrell in 1967 became particularly famous. Terrell had insisted throughout the entire build-up on calling Ali by his old name. During the fight itself, as Ali landed punches clearly and repeatedly, he kept asking Terrell out loud what his name was. That fight became an extended and very public lesson in the cost of disrespect. Then 1967 arrived, and everything changed once more. The Vietnam War was at its most intense and most costly phase. American casualties were rising month after month. The military draft was pulling tens of thousands of young men into the conflict every single month. On April 28, 1967, Ali appeared at the Armed Forces Induction Center in Houston, Texas. When his name was called and he was asked to step forward to accept military service, he did not move. His name was called a second time. He did not move. He had submitted an application for conscientious objector status on the grounds of his religious beliefs. That application had been denied. He refused to accept induction. Within hours, he issued a statement to the assembled press. He said he had no quarrel whatsoever with the Vietnamese people. No Vietnamese person had ever directed the racial slur at him that was aimed at black Americans every single day in their own country. Why should he travel to the other side of the world to fight people who had caused him no harm? While at home, black Americans were still being denied equal rights, equal dignity, and equal standing under the law. That statement articulated, in a handful of words, the fundamental contradiction that millions of black Americans carried silently inside themselves every day of their lives. The government responded immediately and harshly. Ali was convicted of violating the military draft laws. He faced a 5-year prison sentence. He appealed the conviction and remained free during that process. But the immediate consequences were severe and comprehensive. Every state athletic commission in the country stripped him of his boxing license. The World Boxing Association stripped him of his heavyweight championship title. His passport was confiscated, making any international travel impossible. He could not fight in America. He could not fight abroad. At 25 years old, at the absolute peak of his athletic ability, he was effectively locked out of his profession entirely. The cultural consequences were equally devastating. For a very large portion of the American public, he had gone from national hero to villain within days. Editorial pages across the country condemned him in harsh terms. Former admirers became vocal critics. But something else was simultaneously unfolding. On university campuses across the country, young people who opposed the war found in Ali a voice for exactly what they were feeling. He became a powerful symbol of principled resistance to a conflict that growing numbers of Americans had stopped believing in. He was invited to speak at campuses and public rallies. He gave interviews in which he laid out his thinking with complete clarity and absolutely no apology. He said he would not betray his faith. He would not betray his conscience. No championship was worth that price. Those 3.5 years were the hardest years of his life. He lost money. He lost status. He lost the one arena where he could express himself most completely and most powerfully. But he spent those years thinking deeply, reading widely, and speaking with a depth that would shape everything he did for the rest of his days. In 1970, the political landscape of America had shifted dramatically. Public opposition to the war had become mainstream. Support for the conflict had collapsed across broad sections of American society. His boxing license was restored. He could fight again. He came back carrying everything that 3.5 years had built inside him. More patience. More strategic intelligence. A different and deeper relationship with difficulty. But also a body that was 3.5 years older. Those were years that could not be recovered. While fighting his way back through the heavyweight division, the Supreme Court handed down its ruling on his draft case. 8 justices to 0. His conviction was reversed in its entirety. He was formally and completely cleared. But boxing had not waited for him. Joe Frazier had claimed the heavyweight title during his absence. And Frazier was formidable in a way that few opponents in the long history of the sport had been. On March 8, 1971, at Madison Square Garden in New York City, the two men finally met in the ring. The match was called the Fight of the Century. Both men were undefeated going in. Both were former or current champions. It is estimated that more than 300 million people watched the fight on television around the world. Radio broadcasts of the event reached villages across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The fight was everything its billing promised and perhaps more. Ali used his movement and combination punching. But Frazier had a left hook that was fundamentally different from anything Ali had faced before. He could close distance in ways that were genuinely unexpected. In the 15th and final round, Frazier landed one of his signature left hooks squarely and cleanly on Ali's jaw. Ali went down to the canvas. He got back up. But the judges awarded the decision to Frazier. The first professional loss of his entire career. He kept fighting. He worked his way methodically back through the division. Win after win. In 1973 he lost to Ken Norton, who broke his jaw during the fight itself. Ali fought 11 full rounds with a broken jaw before losing the decision. Then he fought Norton again and won. In 1974, he faced Frazier a second time and won by decision. Now only one obstacle remained between him and reclaiming his championship. George Foreman. Foreman had fought Frazier in 1973 and knocked him to the canvas 6 separate times. 6 knockdowns. Against the same Frazier who had knocked Ali himself to the canvas. Foreman had ended the fight in 2 rounds. The match between Ali and Foreman was scheduled for Kinshasa, Zaire, on October 30, 1974. That country is today known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. The fight was given the name the Rumble in the Jungle. Ali arrived in Kinshasa weeks before the fight and immediately began his morning runs through the city streets. Thousands of ordinary Zairans joined him and ran alongside him. He learned the local chant that the people created for him. Ali, Bomaye, which translates roughly as Ali, kill him. He absorbed the energy of an entire continent. He said later he had never in his life felt anything like it. But the fight began in frightening fashion for anyone supporting Ali. Foreman power was everything that had been described and perhaps more. His punches landed on Ali's arms and body with a force unlike anything Ali had previously experienced. And then Ali did something that nobody expected and nobody had planned for. He went to the ropes and stayed there. He leaned into the elastic ropes that lined the ring, letting them absorb some of the impact. He covered his head and body carefully with his arms. He allowed Foreman to punch him. Round after round. Foreman throwing enormous, heavy punches. Ali taking them, deflecting them, using the movement of the ropes to reduce their force. The crowd was horrified. This looked like a man being systematically beaten. This looked like a very slow surrender. But Ali was not panicking. He was thinking. He spoke to Foreman throughout the fight, between the punches. He asked him whether those were really the hardest shots he had. He told him they were not causing any damage. He kept talking. Foreman was getting angrier. He was throwing harder, putting more into every punch. He was burning through his tremendous physical reserves at a rate he did not understand. The technique that Ali was using had a name that would become famous afterward. The rope-a-dope. He invented it and executed it in real time under conditions of extreme pressure against the most dangerous puncher he had ever faced. By the end of the 7th round, something had clearly changed. Foreman punches were arriving more slowly. His combinations were shorter. His legs were carrying him differently. In the 8th round, Ali came off the ropes. He began to throw his own punches with real intent. A right hand landed cleanly and precisely on Foreman's jaw. Foreman staggered. Ali followed immediately with a combination. Foreman fell to the canvas. The referee counted to 10. George Foreman could not rise. Muhammad Ali was world heavyweight champion again. At 32 years old. Against the most feared and powerful puncher of his entire generation. With a plan that nobody had anticipated and that most observers had dismissed as defeat in progress. All of Kinshasa erupted. The roar from that stadium was heard far beyond its walls. The Rumble in the Jungle remains one of the most analyzed and celebrated sporting events in history. A documentary film titled When We Were Kings, released in 1996, tells the full extraordinary story of that night and everything surrounding it. In 1975, the third and final meeting between Ali and Frazier took place in Manila, Philippines. This fight was given the name the Thrilla in Manila. Boxing historians and analysts who debate the greatest individual fights ever staged generally agree that this one belongs very near the top of any serious list. The heat inside the arena that early morning in Manila was simply brutal. The temperature at ringside was reported to be close to 50 degrees Celsius. Both fighters were dealing with that heat before they threw a single punch. The fight that followed over the next 14 rounds was merciless on both sides. Both men absorbed levels of punishment that should by any reasonable measure have ended the contest multiple times. Ali's face swelled from the damage he was receiving. Frazier's eyes were closing from accumulated damage. After the 14th round ended, Frazier trainer Eddie Futch made a decision that Frazier himself reportedly never fully forgave. Futch refused to allow his fighter to come out for the 15th and final round. He stopped the fight and accepted the technical knockout loss. Ali was declared the winner. But what Ali said in the immediate aftermath of the fight was unlike anything he had said after any previous victory in his career. He said it was the closest he had ever come to death. He said he genuinely believed he might have died on that canvas if the fight had continued. The man who had spent more than a decade telling the world he was completely invincible had just admitted, in the quiet minutes after the greatest fight of his career, that he was human. That he had limits. That he had come to those limits that morning in Manila. After Manila, Ali continued to fight for several more years. But the body was composing its own clear message. The speed that had defined his entire career was diminishing in ways that could not be reversed. The reflexes that had made other great fighters look foolish were responding more slowly. In 1978, he lost his title to Leon Spinks, a young fighter who had only 7 professional fights to his name when they met. This was considered one of the most significant upsets in the long history of heavyweight boxing. 7 months later, Ali fought Spinks again and won the rematch. World heavyweight champion for the 3rd time in his career. Only one other fighter in the history of the sport had accomplished that. But the body had made its position absolutely clear. A 1980 challenge against Larry Holmes, the current champion and Ali's former sparring partner, ended when the referee stopped the fight in the 10th round. Holmes landed punches throughout and visibly did not want to hurt the man who had once trained and mentored him. It was a very difficult event to witness. Ali's final professional fight, a 1981 loss to Trevor Berbick in Nassau, Bahamas, ended a career that had stretched across more than 2 decades of professional boxing. Everyone who watched understood. The greatest era in the history of heavyweight boxing was over. But the greatest test of all was still waiting ahead. In 1984, Muhammad Ali was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Parkinson is a progressive neurological disorder that affects the nervous system in ways that worsen over time. Its primary symptoms include involuntary tremors, slowness of voluntary movement, stiffness of the muscles, and gradually increasing difficulty with speech and coordination. Many neurologists and sports medicine specialists believe that the cumulative head trauma absorbed during a long professional boxing career played a significant role in accelerating his condition. The man who had once held press rooms and stadiums completely spellbound with his rapid verbal brilliance began to find words harder and harder to locate. The man who had once moved across the boxing canvas with a lightness that seemed to defy gravity began to walk with a visible tremor and a careful shuffle. Many observers and commentators assumed he would quietly withdraw from public life. He did not. He continued to appear at events and gatherings. He shook hands. He let people see him and be close to him. He refused to disappear from view. In 1990, when hundreds of foreign nationals were trapped in Baghdad following the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, Ali flew to Iraq. He met directly with Saddam Hussein. He negotiated on behalf of the hostages. He returned home with a group of American hostages who had been detained. No government had sent him. No organization had formally authorized the trip. He simply decided to go and went. He traveled extensively across Africa raising funds for children suffering from severe hunger and malnutrition. He visited refugee camps in the Middle East and spent time with displaced families. He was formally appointed as a United Nations Messenger of Peace. He said that service to others is the rent you pay for the room you occupy on this earth. In September 2001, just days after the attacks on New York and Washington, Ali appeared before television cameras. He stated clearly that Islam is a religion of love and peace. He said the people who had committed those acts did not represent his faith or the beliefs of Muslims around the world. He said this at precisely the moment when it was most important for someone with his voice to say it. In 1996, the Atlanta Olympics opened with tremendous ceremony. Billions of people around the world watched the opening ceremony on television and in person. The Olympic torch relay arrived at its final stage inside the stadium. The identity of the final torchbearer was a secret that had been carefully protected until that moment. When a figure with trembling hands emerged at the top of the stadium steps and moved slowly toward the cauldron, the entire arena fell completely silent. It was Ali. His hands shook with the tremors of his illness. His movements were deliberate and careful. He brought the burning torch to the cauldron. He lit the flame. The silence lasted only a moment. Then the sound that rose from that stadium was unlike anything most of the people present had ever heard in their lives. Many people wept openly without embarrassment. That image became one of the most powerful and enduring images in the history of the Olympic movement. Ali married 4 times over the course of his life. He had 9 children. His daughter Layla Ali became a professional boxer after his retirement from the sport. She compiled an undefeated professional record and held multiple world championship titles. Ali never discouraged her from pursuing boxing. He told her to be the greatest. Those who knew him in private settings described a man who was gentle, funny, and completely present with the people around him. He performed magic tricks for children and for adults. He told long, elaborate jokes. He made every person feel that he had all the time in the world to spend with them specifically. In his final years, the progression of his disease made public appearances increasingly demanding. But he continued to appear. He continued to let the world see him. He continued to show up. On June 3, 2016, Muhammad Ali died at a hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. He was 74 years old. His hometown of Louisville organized a public funeral procession and memorial service that drew people from every part of the world. The procession route through the city was lined with tens of thousands of people standing to pay their respects. President Barack Obama released a lengthy personal statement. He wrote that Muhammad Ali shook up the world. And then he added that he shook it up still. Former President Bill Clinton spoke at the memorial service. He said Ali understood that being a heavyweight champion was a wonderful thing. But that what he could do for other people outside of the boxing ring was far more important than any title he could hold. Looking back across the full length and breadth of Muhammad Ali's life, it is tempting to focus on the specific achievements. The speed. The footwork. The verbal brilliance. The fights against Liston and Frazier and Foreman. But I believe the thing that made him genuinely different from every other great athlete who has ever lived is something considerably harder to measure or quantify. He always knew who he was. In a world that insisted on calling him Cassius Clay, he insisted with equal force on being Muhammad Ali. In a world that told him it was his duty to go fight in someone else's war, he said no and accepted the enormous consequences. In a body that Parkinson's disease was slowly and relentlessly limiting, he still showed up. He still allowed people to see him. He still refused to become invisible or to disappear from the world. The pressures brought against him at various points in his life were extraordinary in their scope and force. The government of the most powerful nation in the world told him to fall in line and comply. The entire sporting establishment told him he was finished and irrelevant. His own body worked against him for more than 30 years. None of it succeeded in changing who he was. He knew who he was. And I think that is precisely what his story offers all of us across all the years and all the distance between his life and ours. Most of us will never stand in a boxing ring under the lights. Most of us will never face a military draft board and the weight of that decision. Most of us will never light an Olympic flame before billions of watching eyes. But all of us face, every day of our adult lives, the fundamental question that he faced every day of his. Who are you? And are you willing to be that person, even when it costs something real? Muhammad Ali floated like a butterfly. He stung like a bee. And with his entire extraordinary life, he showed us what a human being can become when they refuse absolutely to betray themselves. Thank you for spending this time with Jenny, getting to know this extraordinary soul. If Ali's story has moved you, please share it with someone you care about. Let more people discover this true master. What made Ali truly extraordinary was not just his physical gifts. Yes, he was blessed with speed that defied logic for a man his size. Yes, he had reflexes sharper than any heavyweight of his generation. But what separated Ali from every other champion was his mind. His psychological warfare began long before the opening bell. He studied opponents with the intensity of a chess grandmaster. He identified their weaknesses, their fears, their breaking points. And then he exploited those vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Ali understood something that most fighters never grasp. The real battle is won or lost in the mind, not the body. When he taunted Sonny Liston, calling him an ugly bear, he was not being reckless. He was executing a carefully planned strategy of psychological domination. When he told George Foreman that the jungle heat would break him, he was planting seeds of doubt. Those seeds blossomed into hesitation, and hesitation cost Foreman the championship. Beyond the ring, Ali demonstrated a courage that few athletes have ever matched. In 1967, when he refused military induction, he stood alone against enormous institutional power. The government stripped him of his title. Athletic commissions across America revoked his boxing license. Corporate sponsors disappeared overnight. Broadcast networks refused to mention his name. He was 25 years old, at the absolute peak of his athletic powers, and suddenly he could not fight professionally anywhere in the country. Most people, facing that kind of pressure, would have quietly complied. They would have found a comfortable desk job in the army, given a few public relations speeches, and preserved their career. Ali refused. He said he had no quarrel with ordinary Vietnamese people. He said the real enemies of Black Americans were not in Southeast Asia. He said his conscience and his faith would not allow him to participate in a war he did not believe in. Those words cost him 3.5 years of his athletic prime. That lost time can never be recovered. No one can calculate exactly how many more championships he might have won. No one can know how different his later years might have been if he had not absorbed punishment during that period of forced exile and hungry comeback. But Ali never expressed regret. He believed the sacrifice was necessary. He believed that some things matter more than championship belts and prize money. When he returned to boxing in 1970, he was a different fighter physically. The legs that had once danced effortlessly were now slightly heavier. The reflexes that had seemed superhuman were now merely exceptional. But his spirit burned brighter than ever. His losses taught him resilience. His struggles deepened his wisdom. His suffering gave his voice an authenticity that could not be manufactured. The later chapters of his life carried a particular kind of grace. When Parkinson's disease began to still his legendary voice and slow his famous hands, Ali met the challenge with the same defiant dignity he had always shown. He did not withdraw from public life. He became a global ambassador for peace and humanitarian causes. He traveled to conflict zones where his name opened doors that politics could not. He embraced children from every culture and religion with genuine warmth. He proved that the greatest champions grow even larger after their competitive days are done. Muhammad Ali gave the world a template for what athletic greatness can mean beyond sport. He showed that a boxer can be a poet, a philosopher, a political force, and a humanitarian. He showed that principle can matter more than profit. He showed that the most powerful voice in any room belongs to the person who has the courage to speak truth without compromise. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Those words became famous because they described his fighting style. But they also describe a life lived with beauty and force, with grace and power, with lightness of spirit and depth of conviction. Muhammad Ali was simply, as he always insisted, the greatest. Not just the greatest boxer. The greatest example of what a human being can choose to be. See you next time.